In these series of lectures, we will examine a very useful feature in Unreal Engine blueprints. It's called timeline. It's used in all sorts of things that require a certain amount of time to complete. For instance, you can transform an object in space in a specified time, or you can code events to trigger at a certain moment. It's all about your imagination. In this lecture, we will build a foundation upon which we'll then build our timeline logic. It will look something like this. Basically, I want this wall to become a bridge when our player character comes close enough. Right now, in the beginning of this lecture, I'd like to tell you that there are many ways this can be achieved. Today, I will be focusing on manipulation of the object through a blueprint timeline. Even in this case, there are at least a couple of ways that come to my mind on how this can be done. Let's begin. Firstly, please remove this pickup from the level. Don't worry, we will use it elsewhere. Now navigate to your Blueprints folder. Right-click somewhere in the empty space. Choose Blueprint class. Now choose Actor. Let's give a logical name to this blueprint. For instance, we can call it BP Wall to Bridge. So, our first goal is to turn this wall static mesh into a blueprint. First, let's open the blueprint we just created. If it opens in this form, you can always click on Open Full Blueprint Editor. As you can see, it opened as a separate window. For our convenience, let's place it next to already open tabs. Now that's much better. Now we need to navigate to the wall static mesh in the content browser. Select the wall and click on this icon to find its location in the content browser. Make sure it's highlighted. You can tell that it's highlighted by these blue markings around the asset. Now we can return to the Wall to Bridge Blueprint tab. Click on Add Component button. Since we previously selected the wall static mesh in the content browser, it will now be available in this list. Actually, that's the reason why I asked you to select the wall static mesh, so that it would appear in this list. If we hadn't selected the wall static mesh, it wouldn't have appeared here. Click on it. Okay, now this static mesh became a component of this blueprint. We can view it if we open the Viewport tab. So the Viewport tab is where you can observe how your blueprint looks. The Event Graph tab is where you tell your blueprint what it needs to do. Let's open the event graph and start building the behavior logic of this blueprint. Okay, now we can create a custom event that will tilt the wall and make it a bridge. Right-click somewhere in the empty space of this graph and search for custom event. What should we call it? Let's simply call it Make It a Bridge. Now, let's ask ourselves, when should this event be fired? As we said in the beginning of this lecture, we want it to fire once our player character comes close to it. Specifically, the wall should turn into a bridge once the player character is somewhere in this location. How can we do that? Well, we can create an invisible trigger in form of collision box that will fire this Make It a Bridge event once it overlaps with our player character. First, let's return to the viewport view of this blueprint. Now click on Add. Search for box collision. Click on it. Let's call this collision box an invisible trigger so that it makes sense. Now let's position it. I want it placed right in front of the wall, so that when player character overlaps with it, the execution of the Make It a Bridge event fires. Looks good to me. It's time to create an event for this invisible trigger. Right-click on it in the Component tab and expand Add Event. Then click on Add on Component Begin Overlap. This should automatically take you to the event graph. This node fires when something overlaps with it, but we need it to fire only when our player character overlaps with it. So let's cast to our player character. BP third person character is our player character, so let's select it. Now we need to specify the other actor as the object of casting. Finally, drag from the execution pin of the cast node and search for the custom event we just created. Actually, this event is the one that will fire this event here. Now let's analyze what goes on in this graph. Please listen carefully, as I really want you to understand this well. Otherwise, you'll certainly encounter problems when casting if you don't really understand what goes on here. Through this input pin, Unreal Engine actually asks us, who is the third person character in this level? You see, Unreal Engine might be very specific when it comes to casting. If we leave this pin without connecting it to anything, the Unreal Engine will become confused and it won't do what we want it to do. Now, how do we tell Unreal Engine who the player character is? Well, when anything overlaps with our invisible trigger, this other node says who it was. If it was something else, rather than a BP third-person character, it will still say that this whatever actor overlapped the trigger. But the cast will fail. In our case, it isn't actually bad if the cast fails if anything else rather than the BP third-person character overlaps our invisible trigger. We only want it to fire if the overlapped actor is BP third-person character. Please take your time to grasp the idea of what we are actually doing and what we want to achieve. More importantly, you need to understand how we achieve what we want. Notes on the screen should help you understand the general idea. If you still have questions, please contact me via QA section and I will try to elaborate even further. Otherwise, let's continue building the logic of the Make It a Bridge event. First, let's test whether our overlap event works at all. Now, I will teach you how to use probably the most powerful debug tool in the Unreal Engine. It's called print string. Let me show you. I will drag from the execution pin of the Make It a Bridge event. Now I will release it. Then I will search for print string. In string, I will write overlap worked. This string should only appear when player character overlaps the invisible trigger. If it shows at some other time or it doesn't show at all, it means that something is wrong. Let's return to the level viewport to test it out. But first, don't forget to compile. What you're looking at here isn't the blueprint we were working on all this time. It's still the static mesh we placed here earlier. Thus, it won't do anything. To make it work, we need to replace it with the blueprint we created. Luckily, it's very easy. First, make sure the blueprint is selected in the content browser. It should be highlighted with this blue color. Now you can right-click on this static mesh. Then expand Replace Selected Actor With. Finally, choose the BP wall to bridge. Note that this wall to bridge blueprint is visible here only because you previously selected it in the content browser. There it is. We successfully replaced the static mesh actor in the level viewport with the blueprint we created. Now let's test whether our print string works. Awesome. It works. Take a closer look at the upper left corner of the screen. The string we attached to our custom event appears here. That's exactly what we wanted. We will be debugging our code a lot in the future, and I'll show you other case scenarios where print string will help us to find bugs in our logic. For now, let's stop here. I don't want lectures to be long, not to overwhelm you. Please continue to the next lecture once you feel ready. Thanks for watching.